Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Ed Steinfeld. I'm the director of the Watson Institute. Steve Kinzer is really going to do the introductions, but I just wanted to welcome you all and personally welcome Ambassador Hossein Mousavian. I'm so happy we're all here today, and particularly that Ambassador Mousavian is here to discuss such an important topic. There are really at least two aspects of the ambassador's presence today that I think are worth noting. One, of course, we find ourselves in a new and unexpected political moment, one which many of us believe will have implications for Iranian-American relations, and there's no better person than Ambassador Mousavian, as you know, to speak about these issues. But there's a second issue, maybe a broader issue, a little bit more long-term issue, and a little bit of an aspirational issue for many of us. Ambassador Mousavian is a scholar, a diplomat, a person of theory and of practice. It's very rare to find somebody who combines all of these aspects of a professional life. And I think for many of us, we view that kind of combination as a model and something to which many of us here, students, faculty, fellows, some of us are already embody, some of our senior fellows, but many of us, including myself, who don't quite embody this model, we aspire to it. And so today, Ambassador, we listen to your comments, both for their content, but also for who's delivering them. Thanks. And for that, let me turn it over to you for an introduction, Steve Kinzer.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ed. It's wonderful to welcome you all here. I'm Stephen Kinzer, a senior fellow here at the Watson Institute. And let me just echo everything that our director told you, and also explain that this is just one little facet of the multifaceted gem that is the Watson Institute. This is the kind of programming that is a very important part of how we connect policy to academia. And as our director said, there's few people that embody this role like Hossein Mousavian. Ambassador Mousavian plays a very interesting, not to say unique, role in world diplomacy. So you know that, of course, the U.S. and Iran have no diplomatic relations. When the United States needs to know what Iran is thinking about something, it's hard for us to find out. We don't have anyone to call in Washington. We don't have an embassy there. They don't have an embassy here. This makes it extremely important for there to be some unofficial back channels by which these two countries can communicate. The people who play that role are, by definition, in the background. They're behind the scenes. But particularly in a relationship like this, which is A, very tense, and B, has very few interlocutors, that person plays a very important role. So both in nuclear-related negotiations and in other larger questions of relations between Iran and the United States, Ambassador Mousavian has played a role far beyond what you might think from just reading his resume. That's what makes him so interesting here. I don't think there's anybody in the United States who has such a clear connection and understanding when it comes to what's really happening inside Iran and inside ruling sources in Iran. So he is truly a unique resource, and we're very lucky to have him with us. His business card just says that he's in the global security program at the Woodrow Wilson School at Princeton, but as I said, there's a lot behind that. Ambassador Mousavian has also been in the senior levels of the Iranian diplomatic corps. He was Iranian ambassador to Germany. He has been the Western Europe director of the foreign ministry. He has also been for 10 years editor-in-chief of the principal English language newspaper in Tehran. And then went on to become a part of the original nuclear negotiating team with the United States and served as the spokesman for that negotiating team. He has a great educational background, too, a combination of degrees from Sacramento State, then the University of Tehran, and finally a PhD from University of Kent in Great Britain. So he covers the landscape. He's the author of a book, of a memoir of his own involvement in the nuclear negotiations. At this moment, he is as well poised as anyone to tell us how people in Iran must be reacting to political events in the United States and what those events and their repercussions in Iran might mean for this very tense but very important relationship. So with that, it's really a thrill for me to welcome to you, to Watson, a unique figure in Iranian-American relations, Ambassador Hossein Mousavian.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Steve. It's really an honor for me to be here today, although this is my first time at Brown, but I already promised the director would not be the last time. I really want to appreciate Steve, Mr. Director, and all other colleagues at Watson Institute to make this event possible, to invite me to enjoy the time today with all of you. The topic is what lies ahead between Iran and the US during Trump. I must sincerely say I really don't know, very frankly speaking. I had an opportunity to meet distinguished professors before coming to this event. It was exactly my question, because they are much more knowledgeable on the US policy compared to me. However, I can say there could be 3 different scenarios for the president-elect and his administration to go ahead on Iran. The first scenario could be regime change policy. Actually, since 1953, from 1953 to 2013, I believe it has been the US strategy, and therefore there is 60 years of experience of regime change policy, the US regime change policy in Iran. And many of you may have heard 1953, when the US and the UK orchestrated a coup, removing democratically elected Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh in Iran and installed a dictator, Shah, which lasted for 25 years. I mean, Iran had a dictator for a quarter of century supported by the US, and practically it was 25 years of US dominance and the Iranian policy from 1953 to 1979. And the revolution, to be very frank with you, it was a reaction to both, to dictatorship and foreign dominance. It was the root causes of the Iranian Revolution. And the US policy was dominating the whole Middle East for oil. When I asked a congressman during a closed session seminar what has been the US policy in the Middle East for decades, he said it was actually oil, because our religion was oil in the Middle East. And therefore, the US was trying to dominate not only Iran and other oil countries at any price, even supporting dictators and corrupted regimes. And the Iranian Revolution actually was a move for independence. And it was completely in contradiction with the general strategy of the US. That's why from 1959, the day revolution happened, Iran and the US, they have been in full confrontation. I think we have a lot of issues which I would discuss, but the major reason Iran and the US, they started confrontation since the day 1 of revolution, because this revolution was for independence. And the US was not going to let one country to be completely successful to be independent, oil country, because the others would learn and then would lose the region. Since 1979, I believe 5 major factors the U.S. has permanently followed on the Iran policy. One, regime change, the first one, as the core strategy of the U.S., all administration, regardless of Democrats or Republicans. The second, imposing sanctions as much as they can. You read in an interview, John Limbert, who former U.S. diplomat, recently said the only thing we know about Iran is sanctions and sanctions and sanctions. We don't know anything else. This is what we know how to do, how to make, and we don't know anything else how make a real policy with Iran. It was a public interview. Isolation, the third parameter of the U.S. policy, and bullying Iran with language of threat and humiliation. If you look at all the statements of the U.S. officials since 1979, it has been really the language of threat, bullying, and humiliation. And of course, fighting, number 5, is fighting the legitimate role and interest of Iran in the region by isolation and all other 4 policies which I said. Right after war, you know, Saddam invaded Iran. Before, all the current issues, none of them existed. None of them. Neither peace process issue, nor Hezbollah, nor Hamas, nor ISIS, nothing. It was just a revolution. And the Arab neighbors, they thought this is the time to attack Iran, and Saddam invaded Iran, and the U.S. supported the invasion of Saddam, 1980s to 1988. And worse, I would say, the U.S. provided material and technology for Saddam Hussein to use weapons of mass destruction. It was the biggest use of weapons of mass destruction after the Second World War, where Saddam attacked Iranians, even Iraqis, with chemical weapons, and where the U.S. provided material and technology for Saddam to use, and where about 100,000 Iranians, they were killed or injured because of the use of weapons of mass destruction. It is the level of hostility and confrontation. After the war, specifically during the nuclear crisis, the U.S. Imposed the most comprehensive sanctions ever during the history of United Nations has been imposed on a country. It was sanctions on Iran. Even sanctions imposed on Iran, more than sanctions imposed on South Korea, although the issue was nuclear, although Iran was member of NPT, although Iran didn't have nuclear weapon, although North Korea withdrew from NPT, although North Korea mastered nuclear weapon, but the sanctions on Iran were more than North Korea. We have been struggling, Iran and the U.S., with 7 major differences. In this period, I'm talking from 1979 to 2013, still exists. It is not resolved. One is about democracy, whether Iran has democracy or not. The second, peace process, Arab-Israeli conflict. The third, human rights. Fourth, weapons of mass destruction. Fifth, terrorism. Sixth, conventional arms. And seventh, the regional rivalries. Practically, they all say it is Iran-Saudi Arabia regional rivalry, but it's more about Iran and the U.S. It is. If Trump is going to go for the same strategy, already Iran-U.S. relations have experienced since 1979, or if you want to go back from 1953 to 2013, I believe he has right cabinet members. When I'm looking to the people he has already chosen, it's really scary. They are all anti-Iran. They are all for regime change. They are all are anti-JCPOA, the nuclear deal. And I just read some quotes. Pompeo said in 2016, Congress must act to change Iran behavior and ultimately the Iranian regime change. Iranian regime should be changed. He's going to be the head of CIA. In 2016, he said, in November, just after the election, he said, I look forward to rolling back this disastrous deal with the world's largest state sponsor of terrorism. Flynn, who is the national security advisor, said regime change in Tehran is the best way to stop Iranian nuclear weapon missile program. You know, Giuliani, John Bolton, I don't need to talk. They have been long-time regime change advocates, allied with the terrorist groups, Iranian terrorist groups of MEK. Even Giuliani was not shameful to get $60,000, $60,000. It was in the US media from the MEK to go to give them lecture. Mathis, in 2012, 2016, said if the US has three major threats of the US, that's Iran, Iran, Iran. I mean, he is going to be the chief of Pentagon. Therefore, I think he has, if it is going to be his policy, he has the right team, and they are well organized. And their school of thought and mindset is exactly to go after the nuclear deal. If they want to go forward to enter a more confrontational policy with Iran, the first step for them would be to tear up the nuclear deal. This is what Trump said during his presidential debate. He said, I would tear up the deal. A little bit, I would like to talk about the deal. The deal was reached in 2015, perhaps, yeah, it was in July, and implemented in January 2016. By then, Iran, up to now, has fully complied with all its commitment within the nuclear deal. There is no complaint from any member of P5+1. When I say P5+1, I mean the five permanent members of United Nations Security Council plus Germany who negotiated the deal with Iran. They all agree that Iran has fully complied, and the IAEA, International Atomic Energy Organization, frequently has issued reports confirming Iran has done all its commitment. There is no doubt. But the US still is not in its full compliance with the commitments, and it is complaint, not only Iranian complaint, this is European complaint, this is Chinese complaint, this is Russian complaint, because the US is committed not to do anything to prevent normal economic relation by other countries with Iran, while majority of trades are in dollars, while the dollar should come for a U-return to New York, and it could be confiscated by the US. Still, the US has not resolved this problem, blocking a lot of normal economic business of Europeans and other countries with the US. Right after the nuclear deal, till today, the US Congress, Republican Congress, has introduced more than 30 legislations on the different issues, regional issues, terrorism, human rights, missile, for sanctions and pressures. I mean, the number of legislations they have already introduced or they have been working is more than a decade of resolutions already have been discussed in the US Congress. You can see how they have been behaving. The Supreme Court ruling, it was about some month ago, $2 billion of Iranian asset on one of the issues. Just last week, the US Senate passed ISA, Iran Sanction Act 99-0. which extend 10-year sanctions on Iran. And that's why the Iranian leader publicly during last years many times have reiterated to Iranians that he said the JCPOA as an experience proved the futility of negotiation with the US, their unfaithfulness, and necessity of distrust in Americans' promises once more. I mean, now this is really a criteria for Iran to judge whether you can trust the US or not. If you have made a deal, if the US have signed, if the other world powers have accepted, if the United Nations Security Council has passed resolutions confirming the deal, now if the US is blocking, that's why you cannot trust the US. This is the main argument from the leadership, from many conservative politicians who do not like Iran-US rapprochement. However, even the leaders said publicly the extension of the Iran Sanction Act would be a clear violation of the JCPOA. The Iranian president also yesterday in parliament said the same. Therefore, I would say the deal already is vulnerable because of US non-compliance. Therefore, if Trump is going to go for a confrontational policy, if he's going to tear up the deal, this is the first thing I believe he would do or he could do. A member of Trump cabinet said we would not tear up the deal, we would go for renegotiating the deal. This deal reached after 12 years of negotiations. And whether the other P5+1 members would be ready to go for another decade of negotiations, I really don't know. If Trump is serious to renegotiate the Iranian nuclear deal, whether would be committed to the deal in parallel would negotiate, or would stop the deal and would ask for negotiations. There are a lot of uncertain questions, which I really don't know what's going to happen if he's going to go for renegotiating the deal. However, I believe if they are going to go for this scenario, the US Congress already has a bunch of legislations in hand. They didn't go for all of them. They passed 2-3 of them because they knew Obama would veto. Now with Trump, perhaps they are much more comfortable that Trump would not veto, and they would bring these legislations one after one, and also they would enter confronting Iran on the regional crisis. Syria, Yemen, we have too many crises for the US and Iran, which they both are key players. It is a huge battleground if the US is going to go for more confrontational policy with Iran. This is the first scenario. And the second scenario I can imagine would be engagement, like what Obama did from 2013 to 2016. His policy was to engage with Iran, to negotiate with Iran, and case by case, to minimize the tensions, the hostilities, and to be patient for a better relation between Iran and the US. He tried the nuclear issue. The real negotiation of P5+1 and Iran was the time 2013 between John Kerry and when we had the new president in Iran after June 2013. Before that, we really never had a real negotiation. During the time I was a spokesperson of the Iranian nuclear deal, 2003 to 2005, we had a very serious nuclear negotiations with Europeans, but they could not make the deal with us because the US was not on board. And the US policy was zero enrichment in Iran, a clear violation of the Non-Proliferation Treaty, because by Non-Proliferation Treaty, every country can have peaceful nuclear technology, including enrichment. And that would be interesting, perhaps, for you to say, in 2005, when I was member of nuclear team, we proposed a package to EU3 for a deal on the nuclear. Europeans, they were satisfied, but the US declined only because of the zero enrichment policy. If you look at the deal reached in 2013, and if you compare with the package we gave in 2005, the principles are exactly the same. I mean, we could have the deal in 2005. Not necessarily another 8 years of confrontation, which both the US lost and Iran lost, both. It was really a lose-lose period for both of them. If you look at the deal, nuclear deal 2013, the principles agreed is exactly the same principles we proposed Europeans into March 2005. However, for the first time, because of Obama's engagement policy, of course, you would say Obama had the same engagement policy in 2008 when he was elected. I would say he didn't have the right team. But in 2013, also he didn't have, perhaps from the American point of view, Ahmadinejad was not the right partner for the US to negotiate. In 2013, we had a new president, and also John Kerry was different with Hillary, and the high-level decision makers at NSC, White House, they were different also in 2013. Dennis Ross was not very much in favor of such a deal during the time he was at the White House. However, for the first time, because of engagement policy, we had a real direct negotiations between Iran and the US, September 2013. And the issue was nuclear. I'm innocent because I really don't believe it, but the US was reiterating publicly, the US President, State Department, saying that Iranian nuclear issue is threat number one for the US. I don't understand why. I don't believe it was really threat number one because Iran doesn't have nuclear weapon. But it was the US position. Okay, if it was threat number one for the US national security, and if US started from September 2013, and if you could reach the deal within 18 months, the final deal, it means negotiations really matters, diplomacy works. And they tried one issue under the umbrella of engagement, high-level negotiations without any precondition and without linking to other problems, because we have a lot of other disputes. If they were going to link one issue to other issues, they would never get to go to anywhere. Also, it was not only nuclear, the achievements. Iran and the US, they were successful to reach a peaceful agreement on one of the financial disputes, 35, 36 years, when Iran paid before revolution $400 million to US for military purchase. The US did not give the money back. They did not give the weapons, and they had to give money plus the interest. They agreed on 1.7 after 35 years. It was the 400 plus the interest. It was not only the financial issue, the security issue. Iran and the US, for the first time, the security officials, they sat together and they agreed on the exchange of prisoners. Some prisoners, American prisoners, Iranian prisoners, they were freed. And you remember last year when, just a month ago, it was not perhaps last year, 16 American sailors unintentionally but illegally, they entered Iranian water territory, and Iran arrested them. Within 16 hours, Iran released. Without such an engagement and direct high-level talks, they could still be in Iran perhaps for another year, some years. because it was a clear violation of international law and Iranian law. About the deal, all nuclear experts, by consensus, they believe that it is the most comprehensive deal during the history of non-proliferation. It is not American nuclear scientists saying that, Europeans, Russians, Chinese. Therefore, this is the biggest achievement for non-proliferation of nuclear weapons. This is much more comprehensive than any other agreement on the nuclear, which closes all pathways toward weaponization. No other nuclear arrangement, like the JCPOA, is strong and powerful to close all pathways toward nuclear weapon. Therefore, if Trump is going to choose the engagement policy, I believe he would need, first of all, to implement the deal correctly as it is. And then it was legacy of Obama, perhaps Cuba and the Iranian nuclear deal. I believe Trump can have a bigger legacy, because if the deal, the principles of this deal is going to be regionalized, then we would have a Middle East free from nuclear weapon. Because all the principles of this deal, like enriching below 5%, as long as you enrich below 5%, it's impossible to have nuclear weapon through enrichment. Like having no reprocessing, you can make nuclear bomb either through enrichment or heavy water reprocessing. The deal says no reprocessing for 25 years. The deal says enrichment below 5%. The deal contains the most comprehensive intrusive inspections, like additional protocol, which is the highest level of international rules and regulations for open nuclear program. Therefore, if you implement the same principles already agreed by world powers, if you regionalize it, the Middle East is seeking for nuclear weapon free zone initiative for about 50 years with zero success. Trump can do it because the deal is done, principles agreed, 180 pages in details, United Nations Security Council has approved, and then he can just invite the other countries in the region to join the same principles to make nuclear weapon free zone in Middle East a legacy far beyond Obama's legacies. If he is going to be more, if globalize the same principles, then we would have a world free of nuclear weapon. It is something for decades everybody is talking, Americans also. Obama said some years ago, this is our policy for world free of nuclear weapon. Therefore, if you have the principles now, because of 18 months, day and night, negotiations between about 200 nuclear scientists worldwide, day and night. Now they have defined every detail, how not to have a nuclear bomb through nuclear program. And then I would say they can go case by case, direct negotiations on the other issues, because we have many other differences. They cannot go for a grand bargain under this scenario. This is one case negotiation, trying to minimize the tensions and try to negotiate on one of the differences. Therefore, the nuclear is done. Trump can go ahead to respect it and to go for a second case to negotiate with Iran. The third scenario, which perhaps some friends at this room would say it is really idealistic, is not going to happen at all during Trump, but this is a scenario of perhaps a real breakthrough in Iran-US relations, because one thing is clear, Trump is unpredictable. It is clear. He can go one other way, either this way or that way. A new approach. And you would say, whether it's possible or not, I would say at least we have a century of relations with this scenario. Iran-US relations started 1856. And for about 100 years, it was a strategic friendship relation between Iran and the US till 1953. And I give you just some examples. Howard Baskerville graduated from Princeton University in 1907, went to Iran. It was the time Iranians, they were fighting in the streets for democracy and constitution. The first country in the Middle East who fought for democracy and constitution. And Howard joined Iranians, and he was killed during demonstrations in 1909. And the funeral, American, by thousands of Iranians as a national hero. He was buried in Iranian city Tabriz. Imagine a US like this compared to the US 1988 when providing chemical weapon to kill or injure 100,000 Iranians. It is two different US. Howard Baskerville has been quoted as saying, the only difference between me and these people is my place of birth. And this is not a big difference. More, would you imagine Iranian parliament, Iranian cabinet approved, decided, passed a rule that they would invite an American to come to lead the financial affair of Iran? They did. Iran invited an American to organize the financial affair of Iran. Parliament approved, cabinet approved. The US was invited. It is very different with interferences when someone is calling, because the US was not going to dominate Iran. Because the US was fighting the dominant power, UK, Russia. UK, Russia, the superpower, the then superpowers, they were fighting to dominate Iran, and the US was fighting for the independence of Iran. It was the spirit of relations for a century. And you cannot imagine how good relations we had, academic. The first medical school was done by Americans, in economy, trade, everything. It was perfect. Whether we are going to use this experience of 100 years between Iran and the US, or the experience of dominance from 1953 to 1979, caused a revolution, or experience of hostility, confrontation from 1979 to 2013, three choices. But if Trump is going to go for a real breakthrough, I would like to say I'm not 100% pessimistic, first of all. Just because 2-3 days ago I heard a statement, it was shocking for me, positively. He said on December 1st, we will destroy ISIS. At the same time, we will pursue a new foreign policy that finally learns from the mistakes of the past. We will stop looking to topple regimes and overthrowing governments. This is something really, if it's going to be implemented. And then he said, we will partner with every nation that is willing to join us in the effort to defeat ISIS. Two major. The US would partner with every country who is going to join the US to fight ISIS, and the US would not go for regime change, interference, like what they did, Iraq, Libya, brought the whole region in a mess. But he would need a roadmap. It is not easy. Perhaps that would be the most complicated part of his foreign policy if he's going to go for the third scenario. The elements of the roadmap for him would be first, to help the two nations for a better understanding. Because of lack of relations of 37, 38 years, there is huge, huge misunderstanding, misperceptions, miscalculations on both sides. We need to do a lot to understand each other. It is not only about government to government. This is number one. Number two, the problem we have on Iran-US relation is that we have the other countries interfering on the US policy with Iran. We have a third countries interfering. You remember when Obama went to US Congress to make a speech to defend the nuclear deal. Just a week later, Netanyahu came to US Congress and made a speech against the US president. Why the US should not make the nuclear deal? I mean, everyone knows how Israel is interfering, and recently we have more invitees like Saudi Arabia and other countries. They are interfering, they are paying with lobbies, they are paying to the think tanks in Washington in order to jeopardize any progress on Iran and the US. Therefore, this would be something you have to take care of it. No interference of third country on bilateral relation, whether you are going to be successful or not. The third would be really to stick to the internationally accepted principles of mutual respect and non-interferences. It is exactly what we had during 100 years, almost 100 years of relations, 1856 to 1953. It was the major elements, the core elements of Iran-US relations. Definitely, we would need to compromise on the legitimate interest of each party in the region. I mean, Iran is a big country with thousands of years of civilization and history, with 1,000 kilometers of common borders with the countries like Iraq, Afghanistan. Its security is linked. Therefore, they have legitimate interest in the region, which the US should really respect. And then, hopefully, Trump is a businessman. He would try to utilize the economic opportunities. The Boeing deal is one of them, $27 billion. Congress is trying to stop it. But if by JCPOA, the US cannot stop selling the passenger planes, aviation, if Trump would help to realize the deal, that would be the first major big deal for $27 billion between Iran and the US, which is passenger plane, is completely humanitarian. Second is the fact that even despite of all other unilateral sanctions the US has, business on agriculture, pharmaceutical, medical, humanitarian, environment, and many other issues are legal. You just need to get a license from OFAC. And Iran has hundreds of billions of dollars of projects in the next 5 years. The US can have a big share. On oil and gas, for the next 3 years, Iran is going to invest $200 billion, where still the major infrastructure of Iranian oil industry is American. And Iranian oil ministry has publicly said we welcome the US to come back. Therefore, for a package of $200 billion, you can imagine the US would be able to take $50 billion within 3-4 years. And there are a lot of other opportunities, and I think that would be a right way to go. Because as long as you don't have economic interest, you're not going to get to anywhere on the political issues. Therefore, to engage two countries in economic and business, that would be number 6 in my roadmap. Number 7 would be people-to-people relations. We have tourism, academic relations, cultural, music, sport, lot of activities just to bring the nations together. Even the states, they don't like each other, but I believe the nations are innocent and they can have a normal relations. And number 8, the last one, which is the most important one, on the roadmap would be to negotiate on differences while cooperating on communalities. Because there are communalities, issues of common interest between Iran and the US, while they have differences. Where are the differences? Democracy. Everyone would agree with me that the Iranian democracy situation in the region is better than all Arab US allies. Because Iran has constitution, has election, the people are electing president, even the leader is elected. Ministers, they have to get vote from parliament. 36 years, 37, 38 years after revolution, Iran has had 38 elections. And you have countries as US allies, which even they don't have constitution. They have never experienced election. And even the women cannot drive. And they are US allies, they get the most sophisticated weapons from the US, and there is zero human right there. Therefore, I believe we need to depart from double standards if we are going to go to this roadmap. Peace process. Bashar just was telling me before this event that from 1994 he has stopped reading anything about peace process because he has no hope. But the Europe, US international community is now has consensus on two-state solution, although Iran does not agree. But the US solution is two-state solution, and everyone knows this is Prime Minister Netanyahu who is opposing. Therefore, rather than blaming Iran on the peace process, which is baseless, the US can use all pressures to convince the Israelis to accept two-state solution. If this is the US solution, which Europeans, Russians, many Arab countries, many Muslim countries, they would agree. On WMD, Iranians, they are Iran is member of Chemical Weapon Convention, Biological Weapon Convention. The only difference on WMD was the nuclear. There has never been complaint on Iran on other WMD issues like chemical, although Iran is the only victim of chemical weapons in the region. Therefore, Iran sticking to all conventional WMD conventionals with the fact nuclear is already resolved. Therefore, there should be a new venue. If the US also is going to regionalize the Iranian nuclear principle to elaborate, to work to help a real weapon-free zone region in the Middle East. Conventional arms, the US really didn't like Iranians to develop their own conventional arms. But the fact is that when the US, Europe, and the others, they put all sanctions on Iran during the war, Iran had to go for self-sufficiency for conventional arms. And now Iranians are self-sufficient on most of the conventional arms. It is not only missile, they can build jet fighters, submarines, and it is a huge potential which you cannot do anything with it because the US pushed Iran to go to self-sufficiency on the nuclear, on the conventional arms. Otherwise, Iran would have imported like other countries. But the US has sold only $110 billion of conventional arms to Iranian rival Saudi Arabia in just recent years. And whole GCC countries, I mean Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Bahrain, Emirates, the 6 Arab countries neighboring Iran, although their population is less than Iran, their military expenditure is 10 times Iran. And only Saudi Arabia military spender is $90 billion, more than Russia, the third in the world. Therefore, if you have such a situation, you cannot really ask Iran to close every capability on your conventional arms, because Iran would have to defend itself, while Iran has experiences of invasion of Arab neighbors after revolution. Iran has experienced a war for 8 years. 1 million people have been killed or injured. Even the weapons of mass destruction has been used. Therefore, they have to develop their capability, although the US doesn't want it. But they would do it, they have done it, and they would continue to do. If we are going to do anything for conventional arms issue, it should be a regional arrangement. It cannot be only Iran. Terrorism is another part of differences. I quote Hillary Clinton saying, New York Times published, Saudi Arabia is the most significant source of funding to Sunni terrorist groups worldwide. I quote Trump saying that Saudi Arabia, the world's biggest funder of terrorism. And also, President Obama, in interview with Atlantic, he said the Saudi heavily funded Wahhabist madrasas, seminaries that teaches the fundamentalist version of Islam favored by the Saudi ruling family. This is a statement by the US, the current president, the Democrat candidate Hillary, and the president-elect. Therefore, it is official recognition by the US where is the major source of threat on terrorism. Now, Iranian leader also publicly said, if the nuclear negotiation were to end without ambiguity, it would be an experience showing it's possible to negotiate with them, with the US, on the other issues. Therefore, it's clear what does he mean. At the moment, as I said, the implementation of the nuclear deal, because of the US policies, still is under ambiguity. But if the deal is going to go forward, therefore, this is official statement of the Iranian highest level saying that we would be ready to engage to negotiate on the other issues. Therefore, to start would be the first the major threat, ISIS, Al-Qaeda, Boko Haram, Ahrar al-Sham, all these terrorist groups. The United Nations Security Council officially has endorsed a resolution saying this is the priority threat to international peace and security. And this is the US statements. Europeans also, they have the same statement. And Iran is at the forefront fighting the ISIS in the region. Iran is the most sincere, powerful country practically fighting regional country, ISIS. The others, either they are supporting or tolerating or playing with fighting ISIS. The US knows. It's publicly also said. Therefore, the first would be, if it's going to be the scenario, the third one, I think to begin with such a issue, officially recognized, President-elect also has said we would go to partnership, any country. Iran is now the leading force in the region fighting ISIS in Iraq and in Syria. And the next would be the regional crisis. You may ask me, what principles Iran and the US, they can agree on the regional crisis? We have huge differences in Syria, in Yemen, in Afghanistan, in Lebanon, everywhere. In Bahrain. I have 5 principles which I really believe the US, the international community, and Iran, they can agree to cooperate to manage the crisis in the region. Number 1 is using diplomacy, not war, which currently this is the US policy, not to go for further wars. Second, the will or the rule of majority. In Afghanistan, we have Sunnis Pashtun majority, right? And Tajik, Shia, they are minority. And Iran supported the rule of majority in Afghanistan. In Iraq, Shia is majority, and Sunnis are minority. And Iran and the US already agreed for the rule of majority in Iraq and in Afghanistan. Therefore, we have two major big evidence where Iranians, Americans, they have agreed on the rule of majority, where one country majority is Sunni Pashtun and the other is Shia. Then we go to Yemen. Sunni is majority, Zaydis, Houthis, they are minority. We go to Bahrain, 80% they are Shia, Sunnis they are in minority. Therefore, this really can be an internationally respected principle as the second principle. The third is power sharing. Although they are minority, they should be able to share the power. In Iraq, the president is a Kurd, the Speaker of Parliament is Sunni, the Prime Minister is Shia. And in Afghanistan, the first, which is president, is Sunni, the second is a Shia. Fourth would be the rights of minority. And we have Christians, we have Kurds, we have somewhere Shia is minority, somewhere Sunni is minority. We have to be very strong to defend the rights of minority. And the last is definitely a free election on every crisis supervised by United Nations, whether this is in Yemen or in Syria. Because when we go to Syria, also Syria, we have Sunnis as majority, but Alawites, they are minority. They should share the power. Their rights should be protected. And we need to have ultimately a free election in Syria, living to the Syrian nation. Steve, it is 1 hour. Perhaps we should leave another 20 minutes, 30 minutes for the people for question and answer. Sorry, it was a bit long.
Well, thank you for that fascinating tour d'horizon. It shows you where we are in this confrontation, that we're very happy to hear you say that the prospects are not 100% pessimistic. So even that is taken as good news in this climate. So I've got just about enough questions to fill up the rest of the time, but I think I'm going to forego that right and ask if someone in the audience would like to ask a question to the ambassador. Go ahead, sir. Wait for the microphone. It's coming right behind you.
Thank you, Ambassador. Fascinating talk as always. Previous coming to grad school, I worked with Pugwash conferences. Some of my time was spent trying to build backtrack diplomacy when no one had any hopes in it. And what I saw in my limited experience there is that who's in Washington and who's in Tehran really changes the tenor of the conversation. Having President Obama in Washington really changed the American position, and in 2013, when President Ahmadinejad was replaced by President Rouhani, that really created an opening. Now, in Washington, there is a new president in town, President Trump, and in Tehran, there's a chance that there will be a new president in May 2017. In your conversation, in your talk, you kind of alluded at the structural factors, some of which we hope will be an anchor to the deal. How do you think potential changes in the agency of who will be in Tehran and who is in Washington can undermine these structural circumstances? What's the worst case scenario for the end of May 2017? Thank you.
You are right. You have been part of Pugwash. You remember Pugwash did a lot to help the nuclear deal, and you remember always failed. The meetings Pugwash had all over the world, but we really could make the nuclear deal because of two issues. I mean, many issues, but the two most important was Obama 2013 with the right administration and election in Tehran. This is one. But the second was the US shifted its policy from zero nuclear bomb, from zero enrichment to zero nuclear bomb. As long as the US was going to insist on zero enrichment, we could never get a deal even with Trump, even with Obama. Then when the US accepted to respect the laws, regulations of Non-Proliferation Treaty, NPT, where we are all members, then Obama shifted from zero enrichment to zero nuclear bomb. Iran welcomed, okay? Therefore, sometimes policies also can be helpful as personalities. Trump, still we don't know really where he's going to go on his foreign policy. No one knows, as far as I understand. I said, many Americans, they tell me he is completely unpredictable. But we have read what he said. Sometimes he said, I would tear up the deal. Again, just some days ago, he said, I would shake hands with any country to be partner to fight ISIS, or I would not go for regime change policy. We don't know yet. Also, we don't know what's going to happen in May election in Iran, because Iranian election always has been completely unpredictable. Until the day of election, even the highest political decision makers really could never know what would be the outcome. Therefore, I cannot say really what would be the Iranian election result, whether moderates would win or conservatives. I really don't know what Trump is going to do. But what I believe is exactly what the Track 2, Pugwash, they have been doing. I mean, scholars, universities, academics, writing, public diplomacy to bring the attention of the world opinion, the U.S., that there is ways and means to reach peace rather than war and fighting.
Someone else? Okay. This is one of my students, Ambassador.
Hi. So you wrote in the Iran nuclear crisis before the deal that sometimes you thought Iran should use what seems like erratic or radical behavior, like missile tests or arrests, just public pronouncements against the U.S. as a tactic to try to get certain outcomes out of its negotiating partners. And it seems, from a student's perspective, that that's something Iran has done for a long time. Can that still work?
No,
in the age of
what I wrote, what I said, it is in my book. I was judging our own experience on nuclear. Europeans, EU3, Germany, UK, and France. In October 2003, they came to us. The 3 foreign ministers, they visited Tehran. And they told us, you know, because it is a very, very, very heated issue, we ask you to suspend enrichment for some months and to implement additional protocol. As I said, this is the highest mechanism of transparency on nuclear, until we can agree through a negotiation on objective guarantees that Iranian nuclear program would never divert toward weaponization. You can have then your enrichment, but that would be peaceful. We are afraid of the nuclear bomb. It is the only way to stop Americans during that time. You remember Bush attacked Afghanistan, Iraq, the notion of attacking countries. It was very, very heated. Then we said, okay, as a goodwill, as a voluntary, because it is not an obligation for Iran. As a confidence building measures, for some months, we would suspend the enrichment, we would implement additional protocol until we get a deal. When we suspended, immediately we suspended from November 2013, and then immediately we implemented additional protocol. And we continued negotiation. The US was not on board, was fighting, objecting the Iranian rights for enrichment, but Americans, they were telling Europeans, look, because of pressure and threat, they have stopped their enrichment. Therefore, continue for indefinite period. 1 year, 5 years, 10 years, for indefinite period of suspensions. Ever, 20 years, no one knows. Here is the point which I made in my book. And you can see why I was right. Because then the US got a wrong message of our goodwill. The US believed now it is time to put more sanctions pressures. Then we were not going to. Okay. Then we had Ahmadinejad. We were gone, right? In 2005. Ahmadinejad started enrichment. Look at the period of 2006 to 2013. Iran started enrichment. The US escalated the sanctions, right? I said the most comprehensive sanctions from 2006 to 2013. Unilateral, multilateral, everything. Central bank, oil, everything. But in reaction, Iranians, they increased the level and capacity of enrichment. To try to understand, to make the US to understand, Iran would not compel under pressure. Before sanctions, we had about 3,000 centrifuges. After sanctions, 22,000. Before sanctions, Iran was enriching below 5%. After sanctions, to 20%. Before sanctions, we had about 100, 200 kilogram of enriched uranium. After sanctions, 8,000 kilogram. Therefore, we reached in 2013 to a point that Iran had just 2 months or 3 months to break out. Iran tolerated the sanctions. The US really couldn't find any more sanctions. Did everything. Iran increased the level and capacity of enrichment to 2 months of breakout. Then the US understood it doesn't work. It is what Kerry said, Obama said. Iran just had 2 months to break out. They could tolerate sanctions for another 2, 5, 10 years, but we would have to negotiate with Iran after breakout. It is the point which, during our time, we should have done small one, not like big scale, in order to understand Americans, this would not work. This is what I meant.
Wonder what your thoughts are on how Russia and a potential relationship between President-elect Trump and Putin that we've kind of seen maybe developing will affect where the US and Iran stand, like whether that possible coalition against ISIS or any similar factors could affect the US's position towards Iran by virtue of improved relations with Russia and President Putin?
No, I think, as I said, perhaps it was part of my suggestions. If Trump is really sincere to what he said we are not going to topple Assad, and this is for Syrian nation to decide. We would fight ISIS. Russia is fighting ISIS. Iran is fighting ISIS. Also, the US practically has been the leading air force on the coalition this side fighting ISIS. I mean, the other members of coalition never I mean, perhaps 95% of the airstrike has been by the US. Practically, it is US. I think that would be really positive, a good start for a major changes in the region, not bringing changes in US-Russia relations, not only US-Iran relations, for stability in the Middle East, because it is not only ISIS. We have many such groups, you know, Al-Qaeda, Jabhat al-Nusra, Ahrar al-Sham, Boko Haram. We have many, and we have a lot of groups to come with the same ideology. Even if we defeat ISIS today, we would have second ISIS, more dangerous than this one, because the source of threat, which is ideology, exists, and we know who is funding this ideology. Everyone knows. But I believe we would need to bring the regional countries like Egypt, like Saudi Arabia, like Turkey on board. Because we need a collective regional international coalition, sincere to fight, because it is not ISIS. Now Saudi Arabia is feeling threat, Turkey is feeling threat, and the GCC is afraid. Therefore, Trump is saying, I would go for a real fight against ISIS. If it is going to be the case, I think that would be a good beginning, a major, perhaps, constructive approach toward the Middle East.
Well, let me take the chance and ask one final question. Is there one over? Richard.
Sorry, can I ask the impolite question? I know you can't overlook the U.S. presence and posture in the Middle East, but even beyond that, it seems Iran has a real problem getting along with all its neighbors. It doesn't really have any good friends in the region except for Bashar al-Assad. And it's been accused of interference in, as well, the list that you named, Bahrain and Yemen and Afghanistan and Lebanon. How does Iran see itself in the region in the future?
Rich, I think Iran, it is not true if we believe Iran's only friend is Bashar, because Iraqi government is friend of Iran. Afghanistan government is friend of Iran. They're working very well with Iran. There is no dispute. Egypt, the real power of Arabs, is coming toward Iranian regional policy more now than Saudi. And other countries like Algeria, they are getting problems with Saudi GCC policies. Therefore, it is not that much. I mean, one. Second, you're right, Iran has a major problem with its Arab regional neighbors. It is not new. It was before revolution, even. During the Shah, it was the case. The Arabs are very much afraid of Persians. They say Iran, big country, 80 million population, thousands years of civilization. And also, they see how a country like Iran, despite of 35 years, 36 years of every pressure, from covert war, overt war, military invasion, sanctions, they have been able to stay so powerful and stable. Then they say, if you remove the sanctions, if Iran and the US get good relations, what's going to happen? You know, they are really afraid of Iran. It is a fact. Iranians also, they blame them. They say, we just made a revolution against the dictator. The first month is you Arabs invaded Iran. Saudi Arabia paid Saddam $40 billion. Kuwait paid $30 billion. And they were after disintegration of Iran. They were not after regime change, you remember, Rich. Saddam claimed a province of Iran, Khuzestan, part of Iraq, and all GCC countries they supported. It was a matter of disintegration of Iran. And they said, look, we have never invaded any country during last 200 years. And you have invaded us. It is a real problem, you know. But I believe, again here we can find a solution. Because the US is less independent on the oil. We don't have traditional US policy of oil in the Middle East, in Persian Gulf. And therefore, the US policy can be changed easily now. Sustainable long-term solution to resolve this issue would be to establish a regional cooperation system between Iran, Iraq, GCC, 6 countries, all 8 countries around Persian Gulf. A very comprehensive on security, economic, something like the EU model, Europeans, using the experiences of OSCE, Organization of Security, you remember, in Europe, using the models of Westphalia in Europe, where Europeans, they had 30 years of similar wars, sectarian war. We have experiences, and we have the model, and we have a UN resolution. Resolution 598, Iran-Iraq ceasefire, 1988, the Article 8 gives a mandate to the Secretary of General of United Nations to go and to negotiate and to work with the regional countries in Persian Gulf for establishing a regional cooperation system in Persian Gulf. The fear of Arabs, of Iranians, and vice versa, is somehow like the fear of Europeans of Germany. You remember, it was the root causes of 2 big world wars. Europeans, they were also afraid of Germany. They were saying it's a big country, it's very, very powerful, and they would. How they resolved? It was European Union, a regional cooperation system, which Germany was completely engaged in everything with Europeans. Now, a small country like Norway is comfortable with Germany. Therefore, this is really, I believe, the same model the US can promote, the world powers they can promote. They have responsibility because they have United Nations Security Council resolution. That the effort they put on the nuclear issue, if they have 10% of that effort, we would be able to reach a regional cooperation system where the US would be able to gradually leave, not immediately. That would be great because the US would invest hundreds of billions of dollars for its own infrastructure rather than wasting the money over there while they don't need oil. And they would convert the responsibility to the regional countries. They take care of their own security.
Well, that touched on most of what I was going to ask. So on that happy note, I want to thank you again for making the trip. You got a long ride. Thanks for coming and joining us.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.